Well, and that's the heart that we want to bring to this series. It sounds a little flippant and almost arrogant to say kiss stupid goodbye, like I'm going to stand up and be the great wise one. But we do believe we have a source of truth and a source of application for us that will give us insight into how to live as Jesus has lived and what he's modeled for us. Also, this is kind of a weird morning in that there were no Saturday night services, and so I'm now saying hello to the Saratoga campus at the 11:15 hour as I've buzzed over to South Hills, and we'll be preaching there soon. And so, hi guys, thanks for watching me. And let's open God's Word up to Matthew chapter 5. If you brought a Bible or your flat screen device, you can open that up as well. And we're going to take a look at some things about anger. Things about anger. And I come to you as I have more experience in anger than most topics that I bring to you. So I have a little bit more of knowledge. I've had a little bit more of the negative effects. I grew up in an angry family. Both my parents were angry drunks. I say this all the time, but there's lots of different kinds of drunks. You know that if you're around people who drink. Both of my parents were violent alcoholics, so they were the angry kind. You know, it's kind of like the Seven Dwarfs in Sleeping Beauty, sleepy and grumpy, and except for it's much more destructive. And so grew up in an angry family. It was modeled for me. It seemed to be the model of how to settle things. And so I've got my most embarrassing moment as an adult, by far, was because of anger. Where I stood in front of, I was at a church basketball game, and I was in the middle of the court, just yelling and angry and out of control. I was 26 years old, and I remember in the middle of this yelling in the church basketball league, turning and seeing Dana shaking her head and getting up and leaving, and how embarrassed I was that my anger had just completely taken over. I've said stupid things to people that I love the most. I've said hurtful things. Anger has been something that's been pretty destructive. But as I got up this morning, I was looking at my life and I was saying, I haven't been really mad I was looking back on 2015 and I was thinking, I can't remember being really mad once. So for those of you in the room who are like anger maniacs and completely out of control, that was me. And there is hope, not because I'm some disciplined guy, but just because of the work of Christ and what he has taught. So Matthew chapter 5 is arguably Jesus' most famous sermon. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. And it's in this that he kind of turns all of the teaching of his present-day religious experience right on its head. There was this prevalent understanding of how God worked, and that was that if you were blessed with riches and health and a good job and those kinds of things, then that meant that God's favor was on you. And if you were outside of that, if you were sick or without work or bad things have happened or you lost a loved one, then God's favor was obviously not on you. And Jesus takes all of that teaching about what blessing means, and blessing equals material possessions and the worldly blessing. He takes all that and flips it right on its head with what we call the Beatitudes. And then he goes about and says, this is what it means to be a follower of mine. And basically he says, your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees. Now, that sounds easy for us because we see the Pharisees in light of the crucifixion and we see their real heart looking back on them. But you got to understand the Pharisees were the most outwardly righteous people ever. Take the most religious person you know that's the most legalistic, righteous, rule-following rascal you ever met and multiply it times 10 and you maybe will get a Pharisee. And these guys were fanatical about their outward management of their lives. And then Jesus says, you got to exceed that. And what he's saying is that the kind of life I'm calling you to has really very little to do with the outside measurements. And then he begins to go through a series of 6 different things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, yeah, 6. And he says this crazy thing. He says, you have heard it said, but I say. You have heard it said, and basically he's saying that's a very common introduction to a teaching from a rabbi of Jesus' day. You have heard it said, and then he would just go ahead and say what's been said. You have heard it said, and I say just what they've said. But he says something incredibly different. He says, you have heard it said, but I say. And this is what he says about anger. You have heard it said to people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. There's this outward appearance, outward things that are going on. Here's the phrase, but I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother is subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin, but anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. And until the word hell shows up, we're like, Raka, you fool. I mean, that doesn't sound like it's a very big deal. So let me walk you through these three different levels of what Jesus is saying about what the anger and the animosity that happens inside of our heart. The first one, anger, he's saying if you at this level, usually if your anger led you to kill, then you'd be subject to a civil court. But at this level, you would go to a civil court. You would, and there are several words that are used for anger. There are 4 different words in the New Testament. This is the strongest one that's applied to humans. So this is not just like I got a little upset today. I said a bad word. This is an anger. Actually, the word comes from sap rising up in a tree and coming up. That it's actually used of someone who is an impulsive nature. I thought back on my teen years. My father left when I was 11, and at that point, I got super angry about what that meant for me. I didn't really understand it back then, but if you wanted to say, what was I as a teenager? I was a teenager of rage. I was a child of rage. I had red hair. I know. Give me a break. And I was a typical redheaded kid. I was fly off the handle and had rage in almost any kind of an instance. And this is this idea of this anger that happens that's a habitual, kind of a common characteristic of who you are. It has to do with dwelling on things and moving towards, you know you're angry when you're kind of still thinking about it. And you're thinking about all the ways you can kind of get right or make them pay. That kind of anger that you have in your heart. This is that word. It's this initial anger of things that is just common. Now, the next word though, raka, says that you'll go to this before the Sanhedrin, which is the highest court in the land. And in this, it adds to the idea of contempt. So you're not only angry, but you've now began to associate it not to the event, but to a person. And in this, it says that anger and contempt are the twin. This is Dallas Willard. He says, anger and contempt are the twin scourges of the earth. Mingled with greed and sexual lust, these bitter emotions form the poisonous brew in which human existence stands suspended. And it's this Aramaic term, raka, that really doesn't mean anything to us, but that brings about this, it's no longer about the event, it's about the people. Okay, are you with me? So there's this initial flaring up. It's about the event of what's going on. And then as you dwell on it or as you go deeper into that anger, then you realize that you're going to go before the Sanhedrin, the highest court in the land. You will go before the Sanhedrin when contempt comes in, and it's no longer about the event, it's about the person. But then he goes to this other word, and this is where the word actually, this teaching doesn't help us very much. Because he says, if you say raka, if you call someone raka, and that kind of sounds like it must be bad. You kind of like, okay, you're angry, okay, then you raka, raka. They said that to pronounce the word, it would have been like you're clearing your throat to throw something up. to get rid of something. I don't know. I can't even do raka. Just, let's just do that. And for fun, let's just all do it together, okay? Even on video next hour. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's that sound right there. It's gone from the event to contempt. But then this next one, so raka sounds bad, but then it goes, and if you say to someone, you fool, and you're like, you fool? Okay, so I apologize for this, but it's going to a level of language that assassinates. Okay, and we have these. We have these phrases. Your mind's going to them right now. And fool ain't strong enough. Okay? Dumb butt ain't even strong enough. I got in trouble. The kids were here for Christmas. They had to leave on the 20th. But I said, something happened on TV. And I said, you dumb butt. And Jennifer, our daughter-in-law, looked at me and said, we don't say dumb. And we don't say butt. I'm a negative influence on my grandbabies. What can I say? So but it's worse than that. So you go your own place. I'm not going to go there, but it has to do with ancestry and who your parents were. It's that kind of word where it attacks. And it says here that when you get to this level, you're in danger of the fires of hell. Jesus is trying to tell you that the righteousness that surpasses the righteousness of the Pharisees is not simply about an outward act, but that it's about an inward attitude that moves beyond contempt to hatred. And we just saw a number of events that are based on this kind of mindset that goes from an event to a contempt for a person to a hatred for a people. And based on your ideology and how you view the world, there are some people in your mind that we should get rid of. And Jesus says that when you walk into anger and let it follow its course in such a way where you begin to think that you can strap bombs to innocent people and kill these folks because of the hatred that you have, that kind of mindset puts you in danger of hell. Again, quoting Dallas Willard, it says, it combines all that is evil about anger as well as contempt. It is not possible for people with such attitudes towards others to live in the movement of God's kingdom, for they are totally out of harmony with it. Jesus is saying that the attitude of your heart that begins with this event, if left to simmer, can move towards this contempt towards a person that if left long enough, that person will then become part of a group, and your life will be centered around a hatred of avoidance and persecution and even death if gone to a far enough radicalization. And that this kind of anger and angry life is out of step with God. There's a passage in James that says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires." Now, this is not saying, and the teachings of the Scriptures are actually, you can go to Ephesians 4 as well and see that not all anger is wrong. There is a righteous indignation and anger that moves God's people to great things. So you shouldn't just completely say, I want to be completely without anger. That's the wrong ask. It doesn't say any more than it says be without anger, than it does say be without speech. The same word is used as slow to speak and slow to become angry. But there's a process of moving into our anger that could be helpful. We can see, I don't need to give you examples. I've got 100 of them. I've got more than that if I took the time of how it's been destructive in my life, in the most important relationships that in my existence. Everyone has these. What I wanted to do was raise the bar that it's not just some little emotion like everything else, that left to itself, it will take us down a path that puts us in the danger of hell. So, how do we control it? How do we control it? Well, the first is to decide what kind of an angry person are you. Let's just admit we're all angry in different ways. All of us. Okay, if you're saying, well, no, I'm not angry. Talk to somebody who loves you. I'm not saying you got an anger problem. I'm just saying we all show anger. We all get angry in non-healthy ways. And here's some different ones. I've listed them for you on your handout. There's spewers. I grew up in a family of spewers. In fact, we were just talking about this about a year ago, my wife and I, and we have 5 kids in my family, and we're all loud. We're all spewers, all of us, all 5. She says my wife is amazed that all 5 of us are that way because she has 4 kids in her family, and I don't know that you have any spewers. No spewers, which seems wrong. It just seems. So a spewer is someone who, you know what they feel. You know how they feel about something. They just spew it out. It's like a garden hose. It's always on. Okay, and their emotions are running. You pretty much know if I'm excited. You know if I'm sad. You know if I'm angry. I'm not a mystery. If you think, wow, that Steve's a mystery, then you are in trouble in your human relations. So there's spewers. We get spewers. There's suppressors. Anger does not have to be acted upon to be a poison for you. There are people who suppress anger. She's in the room, so I can say my wife is mostly a suppressor. And here's the deal about suppressors. They only suppress for so long, and then they become what? A spewer in gigantic proportions. So if you're a suppressor with a great memory, you qualify as a gigantic spewer at some point because you'll spew and you'll bring thoughts for the last 12 months into it. And you did this, and you did this, and you did this, and you did this. In fact, on April 12th at 7:30 in the afternoon, and then, in the evening, so you get it. And then there are leakers. You know they're mad. Everybody knows they're mad, except the leaker. And you ask them, why are you so mad? What do they say? I'm not mad. But they keep saying these little things, these little statements, these passive-aggressive statements that you know they're ticked. So you just need to, and by the way, that self-diagnosing is very, very difficult. It takes a very mature person to be honest about this, and so you may get someone to help you, spewer, suppressor, or leaker. And once you've identified that, then I've got some things, just some very practical things to kind of walk you through what's helped. When I was given my very first Bible, I was 17 years old, and the people who had been discipling me wrote a verse in the front of that Bible. And it was Proverbs 15:1, which says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Now think about this for a second. You're you're discipling a 17-year-old kid, and you're going to write something in the front of their Bible to really encourage them. And you write Proverbs 15:1. What does that tell you about me? It tells you that they had recognized in the matter of just some short months that unless my anger began to submit to the work of Jesus, I was going to be a destructive individual to all the people that were closest to me and to some who weren't even very close. So getting a handle on this, first, I call it doing your ABCs, and it's really what you learned in kindergarten when somebody said count to 10. It's just a way of counting to 10. A is acknowledge. Acknowledge your anger. We've already talked about this. The number one response when somebody asks you, why are you so angry? The number one response in all types of guys is, I'm not angry. Except you don't say it like that. You don't say, I'm not angry. You say, I'm not angry. What's your problem? Right? Acknowledge the anger. B, this has been helpful for me, backtrack to the primary emotion. Backtrack back to what's really going on. Again, this is another way to count to 10 really slow. Is there a hurt? Is there a frustration? Is there an insecurity? Hurts are fairly easy. As you start to backtrack back, am I hurt? And it's like you can usually say that. Frustration is the one that kept popping up for me when I kept backtracking into ABCs. Frustration, I would get frustrated. I had something I wanted to accomplish, something I wanted to get done, something I thought I needed to move towards, and somebody was blocking it. Like, it just didn't make sense in my own life for me to be working on a sermon about anger and for someone to come into the office and say, I need to see you right now, and me to get mad about it. That just didn't make sense until I understood there's a frustration. I didn't plan for you, and you show up. And you may show up with a gift. You may show up, I just need 30 minutes, and at the end of the time, you're going to hand me a gift, and I'm still mad. Because I've kind of laid what I wanted to get done. Frustration's a little harder to admit, and then insecurities. People say something to you, and you know that there's an element of truth in it. They're trying to help you, maybe they're not. Maybe they're just trying to make you aware of how insufficient you are. And as they say that to you, you know it's true. If someone were to say to me, you're just a little arrogant when you preach. My initial reaction would be to get mad and to say to them, no, I'm not. Who are you? But there's this insecurity in me that knows that pride is a gigantic part of what God has been constantly working on in my life. It's an insecurity of mine. I want to grow. I want to listen to the truth. But I get angry about it. Just to backtrack and try to find the primary emotion that's going on. Acknowledge your anger, backtrack it, and then consider the proper response. Again, I'm trying to get you to count to 10 real slow. But while you're counting to 10, rather than just saying 1, 2, I'm going to kill them, 3. Because what happens is I'm sitting there counting, and I'm counting, thinking about a way to respond that gets even or turns the table or lets them know I'm not the only one in the conversation with a problem. By the way, I come up with my best responses to people's statements to me at about 1 in the morning. Anybody like that? Where you're like, ooh, that would have been great to say. Do your ABCs. Acknowledge your anger, backtrack, and consider a proper response. Ephesians 4, verses 26 and 27. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Refuse to stay angry. This is actually quite an amazing statement. That there is an anger that can lead to sin. And as you let that anger stew, it actually becomes an opening to negative spiritual responses. The enemy who seeks to destroy you gains an opening for the longer you allow anger to remain a part of your life. Think of that for a second. Just think how important that might be. I know that many in the room are thinking about 2016 and all of the things that are in front of them. I am one of them. I love looking, and I'm excited about 2016. Another campus, we hope, north of us. We've already hired the guy to lead that, who I think is a wonderful man. A Spanish service for us that's going to meet on the South Hills campus at 11:15. Already got that guy, and I think he's a wonderful man. I'm looking at 2016 and saying, man, expressions of our community I just love what God is doing. But also in the midst of that, I want to move towards not letting anything that's evil be an influence in it. And if anger is a part of it, anger seems to be one of the things where the enemy has a foothold. It's a double whammy on you. It gives you ulcers, and it inhibits your spiritual life. I can't impress, because there's some of you in the room that think anger is one of your strong points. You think, that's, I feel passionately. I get it. You've rationalized it, you've justified it, you've made it one of your strengths. But almost everything that can be done with anger can be done better without it. So refuse to stay angry. And then this is the last one, and this is, I think it's, I just say this. If it's serious, get serious. And there are some of you in the room, it's serious, and you need to get help with it. You need to get help. There's some of you in the room wondering if it's serious. It probably is serious. Ask the people that love you the most. Ask the safest people in your life. If anger is a hallmark. This became a gigantic issue for me when I was studying the scriptures. It's probably, over 15, way over 15 years ago, 20 years ago or more. When I'm studying the scriptures, and Christ, the one place in the scriptures where Christ describes himself, says, I am gentle and humble in heart. And when I read that, it was like the voice of God saying, what would your son say of you? And I knew at that moment, they would never use gentle or humble in heart. And it was serious. I needed to change how I talked to my kids. And if in your life it's serious, get serious. Now here's how serious Jesus says it is. He says, therefore, in verse 23, it's right after the part I just told you about how you're the three different levels of anger. He says then, therefore, in other words, in light of what I just said, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, context, anger, leave your gift there from the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come offer your gift. Reconciliation ought to be above worship. Your friends ought to be more important to you. than what you own, how much you have, what you can gain by running over people, by powering up. If you're right in the middle of worship, if we were taking communion today, I would tell, this would be the application. Don't take it if you're angry with somebody. And go and be reconciled to them. Philippians 2, verses 14 and 15. Do all things, and guess what that word all means in the Greek? All. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God, above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights of the world. Let's pray together. There are some of you in the room, as our heads are bowed, you can give great praise to the Father for the work that He has done, like me, for the work that He has done, slow but sure, on your anger. And at this time, just be thankful for it. There are others in the room who claim allegiance to Christ and whose life is marked by anger. It doesn't matter if you're spewing or leaking or suppressing. It doesn't matter. It's marked. It's marked. Your weekly experience, week in and week out, is anger. You're angry at your boss. You're angry at your employees. You're angry at the traffic. You're angry at the lights. You're angry at your kids. You're angry at your teachers. You're angry. And your anger and God's purposes are in opposition to each other. Now, I want to give you a chance right now. I just cry out to our good, good Father and acknowledge to Him the anger that you have in you. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. May your work in us, Father, drive anger away. May you find us to be people of peace. And then, God, if there are some in our lives that we need to make right, we need to leave our gifts at the altar and we need to now go and make right. I pray that 2016 would be a year of less anger and more reconciliation so that you can be glorified and that your kingdom could advance in us. God, we want to be known as your people. And above all else, don't let us be known as angry. Passionate, yes. Committed, yes. Maybe even fanatical in some ways, absolutely okay, but not angry. May we not be drug in to the dialogue of hatred. In Jesus' name, amen.